Welcome to the Empowered Women podcast, celebrating courageous women who turn struggles into success. And I'm your host, Nicole Ananda. And for the last 20 years as a certified life coach and healing arts professional, I've supported women to live a life of passion, power, and purpose so they can experience more love, joy, and success. If you're ready to ignite your life, please subscribe to the Empowered Women and become a part of our community where excuses hold no power, resilience reigns, transformation happens, authentic power is created, and wise women lift each other up higher and higher. Today's guest is Dr. Lucy Houghton, and she is a courage and well-being researcher, a registered nurse, and an expert strategist in organizational thriving. She holds a bachelor's degree in biology, exercise science, and nursing, a master's in sports medicine, and a PhD in leadership and human performance. Dr. Houghton spent 10 years as an athletic trainer for collegiate and Olympic athletes and 15 years as a nurse in emergency services, community health, and leadership development. With a heart for service, Dr. Houghton co-leads a task force aimed at reducing burnout in the largest healthcare system in the United States. And her journey has led her to collaborate with diverse leaders and organizations from Ontario's Ministry of Children and the United States Secret Service to Southern Oregon University and the Interagency Fire Academy, helping them develop work environments where people don't just survive, they thrive. And Dr. Houghton's mission is to equip leaders with the tools to create strong teams and thriving workplaces as a catalyst for positive change to rehumanize the workplace. Wow, wow, wow. We are so honored to have you here. What an amazing history that we got to just run through with you. And I am so excited to hear your incredible journey and whatever you'd like to share with us today, how you turned any sort of struggles into successes. And I'm just going to let you riff because you've got an amazing tapestry of experience and life. So we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It was very kind. Um, I mean, what do you choose? I think.
I know.
Um, I don't know. I think for me, just I've had the blessed opportunity to have so many diverse experiences, and in all of that diversity, still found these really common themes and threads for me in my life, which kept leading me back to um, you know just different situations for women in which we might feel a little held back, or maybe like we're bumping our head on a ceiling, or maybe it's a sticky floor, I'm not sure. But definitely different. The experience of being a woman in all kinds of interesting professions just made it different. And I was always very curious about things that were different. And I wanted to, through all of my career paths, really wanted to understand, like, why? Why is it that a male in my position can have, we can have all of the same things, but he'll be treated differently than I am, or words that were used and places sometimes that meant that I could be incredibly influential where they might struggle. And then there's
Mm.
other places where they could be incredibly influential and I would struggle, simply just based on um, you know being a woman. And so that was really curious to me. But I also saw this other thing throughout all of these different positions. And that really got me excited to learn more. And that was that, as I started to progress in my career, I would see men really reach back and pull each other up. And it was like this unspoken code that this is what happened. They just brought each other along.
Uh-huh.
And being a woman, that was not my experience. It was like, I had to watch out for what was behind my back and who was stepping on my shoulder and all of these things. It was just not my experience at all. And and I wanted to know, like, why? What did we miss?
Mm,
And could we learn more about it, and can we teach it and really help women to develop skills that help us, what I've now come to, explore, is really courageous action, courageous leadership, courageous living in a way that moves us from surviving into thriving. And so,
mhm.
that was just always this curiosity that's come along and along my whole journey and having my own experiences. A few years ago, I guess it's been more than a few years ago at this point, but some years ago,
Yeah.
I conducted a research study, and it was with all women leaders. And I really asked the question then, what happens? Like, how do women summon courage? How do
Oh, I
women?
love that question.
And
Perfect for the title of this podcast. Courageous Women. That
yes,
is a great question.
and I got to interview women of all different areas. So whether that's, all different diversities, um, all different professional lives, upbringings, I mean, all over the world.
Wow.
And literally, they would just give me the grace to ask them such deep, intimate questions about how they did things. And what, was often really so fascinating is, what about the times when you weren't able to summon courage? Tell me about those things. And so,
Wow.
as all of that emerged, it was thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of interviews, and you have to code every single one of them based on the type of research that I do. And it came to bloom a courage cultivation theory, which I've then turned into leadership development programs. And it's the courage navigation system, and helps us. And what I've really come to learn is, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. None of that really seems to matter so much. It is in the nuances, but we seem to, if really conjure courage in a very similar way as human beings. And
That's
so,
fascinating. Yeah, I love this.
yeah, so it was, that's led me to, I mean, just so much richness. But I think, like, if there was one thing I could share with the world, if there was one thing I would want people to know about courage, it would be that on the other side of choosing it, because when we're choosing courage, it doesn't feel like courage. It feels like all kinds of other things. It feels like vulnerability. It feels like risk. It feels uncertain, scary. Sometimes apathy is in there. It feels a whole lot of other ways than what we think of when we think of courage.
Uh-huh.
But on the other side of it is freedom,
Mhm.
empowerment, a strengthening of ourselves, and relief. And that was true whether people were, had successful outcomes or not in whatever they chose courage to do. So it didn't matter if they failed or not, those outcomes were still true for them.
That's fascinating. That's such a rich experience that you got to go through. And I'm so curious when you said about there's not that much of a difference, or you didn't see a difference between men and women. What would be the reason why women would have, let's say, a harder time, if that's the case, summoning courage? Or why is it that, I would love to know, like, what were some of the differences, if there
Yeah.
were any?
Yeah, so that is still ongoing. That's still an ongoing thing that I'm working on. But
Okay, yeah.
some of the things that I've seen are, I think will probably just sound very familiar to us as we go through our lives. But men do not tend to experience as much struggle around body image,
Mm.
um, around the aging process. So oftentimes, what I have understood from their experiences is they actually will tend to gain a level of respect and camaraderie and authority and all of these, that the elevation in the way that we perceive them over time, especially as they age into, the later years, or the midway point even.
Yeah.
Whereas for women, that experience starts to be different. So oftentimes women will describe, I started out without a voice. I found my voice. My voice was taken away.
Oh yeah, I can so relate to that. So many of my clients, it's very familiar to me when they're like going through a life reinvention, let's call it, in the later years, 40s, 50s, 60s. Maybe now they're empty nesters or something shifted, and they literally do have to find their voice again. It's like amazing to me, and I've gone through that myself. So that's an interesting insight.
Yeah, and then not to discount the male experience, because on
Yeah.
their side they do struggle with other things, like not being seen as masculine enough. And
Mm,
so, it's a struggle for them in particular. I think now it's becoming even more of a struggle in some ways, where, there's the movement in, at least in business leadership, of being vulnerable,
yeah.
and in particular with the groups that I work with, so police, fire,
Yeah.
some of our lawyers, physicians, right? Some of these areas where it is that tough exterior that has really helped them
Yep.
in the work that they do. And it's needed in some places, right? We can't
Yeah.
just be completely raw all the time if you are a fireman or a
Right.
police, right? You can't do that all the time. However, when we're leading our people, now how do you make the shift from when to have the armor on, when they need to take it off? And for them, in some ways that's a very physical act. And so
Yeah.
we talk a lot about ritual,
Mm.
and like literally, like, do I need to take this off? Do I need to
Uh-huh.
put my
Physically.
weapons away? So that I can remind myself which places do I or don't I have those experiences. And so I think, it's
Uh-huh.
important to just recognize that we all need to some encourage, but sometimes it shows up or looks a little different.
Uh-huh. Well, I would imagine the workplace nowadays is just so different. I mean, there's so much going on, even with regards to gender and all of that. So, um, is it more that our culture is becoming more in tune with our emotions? Is it the blurring of the gender roles? Like, I'm always curious about this as a woman who deals with a lot of relationship challenges with women. I see women getting into the workplace and becoming stronger and having more masculine traits in many ways, and then men trying to figure out their place. Women want them to be vulnerable, but they also want them to be masculine. And they're like, well, which one do you want? I don't know which one to be for you anymore. And there's all this blurring of roles. What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, I mean,
It's kind of a big question, isn't it?
I certainly haven't, done that kind of extensive look into it. But I think just from my own experiences, I do think that it was definitely an easier navigation when there were when it was a male workforce,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And or when there were specific areas in which women were in the workforce. And so I think that made it easier. I'm
yeah.
certainly not saying that I think that that made it right.
Right, right.
But I do think that when things are sectioned off in these, little pretty,
Mm,
boxes,
yeah,
that Yeah, that makes it easier. And yet, what I think is needed is an integrated world where the masculine and the feminine energies are they're integrated with equality. And I
Yeah.
think that's really important for us. I mean, I just saw this great video. It was so excellent. Um, and and it really demonstrated why we need both.
Uh-huh.
And it was this hula hoop. And so they did a line of men and a line of women. And you had to grab arms with each other and you couldn't let go. And so you kind of formed this arm chain.
Mhm.
And somebody put the hula hoop on one arm and you had to figure out how to get it over your head and, step through with your feet and shimmy it over to your to the next person who you're holding arms with. And this is what you've got. And
Yeah.
so for the men, it was like each one was trying to figure it out. And then they started to like both stick their legs through at the same time. Like there were two guys going through at the same time, which, was there, and they worked together. They were, one was trying to get it over the other guy's head. They were working together. What was interesting was the approach the women took was wildly different. And it was immediate. The first gal got herself through and she just held the hula hoop out while still connected. And all the women just went through in single file line. And it was a difference. It was a difference of 32 seconds, I think, 32 or 33, and 17. And so I
Wow.
think that just really talks to us about like that diversity and brain power you get when you put both groups together. Can you imagine how fast they would have went if we put both groups together? And we see that over and over and over. We see when you have women in the boardroom, organizations have better stability financially. They
Interesting.
have better belonging and diversity, inclusion, and they are more innovative and creative.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
that's not from not having men there. That I'm not saying
Right.
all women.
Yeah.
I'm saying both.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense to me as like a yoga instructor who's been doing yoga for 20 years. We always learned about masculine and feminine energy and how it was like sun and moon, hatha yoga, and just the characteristics of both. And the idea in yoga as a spiritual practice, or whatever you'd like to call it, a science, I call it a science, was to come to the middle, was always to come to neutrality. And
Mhm.
that, you enlist certain qualities of the feminine and the masculine, and they interweave and they go like this even through the body. And you've got your two hemispheres of the brain, but the whole practice of meditation and yoga was to get to the center and get to harmony or equanimity or neutrality. So I was lucky that I had that understanding. But then what's interesting is when you start to bring that into relationships and like you're bringing it into the workforce, it gets, there's dynamics that people are still trying to figure out. Like, is that feminine? Is that masculine? Is this the shadow feminine? Is this the shadow masculine? And now we're kind of making it this three-dimensional or multi-dimensional application to it. And I love that, but I think it's so important because the masculinity is kind of like that direction, and it's about clarity and it's about protection, and it's more like cutting through the noise, and the feminine is like the nurturing and the more like creative, like you said, and more of the surrendering to the unknown, and so
Mhm.
it is interesting. We need both, and as a whole human, and then within, I love that you're taking that all into the organization.
Yeah, I think of
Beautiful.
it very much that way as well. I love how you put that. My husband and I actually just started going to yoga together. I've done it for years, but to have him in practice with me is such a cool experience because I think we're having now as a couple this whole experience on our own and its own
Yeah.
interesting level, and to see, just where I feel like I need to stretch and grow, and then where he feels like he needs to stretch and grow. And it's such a beautiful experience now because we can talk about that,
Uh-huh.
and then we can see places where it's meaningful to us in other parts. of our relationship. And I just think when you have an openness and a language around it, it really can create a synergy that's like a super bounce. You know, did you ever jump on trampolines?
Yes, I
You know,
love the
you know the
super.
super bounce?
I was just doing that with my son last week. He's like, it's like when you double bounce and you just go like
You just
super
fly
high.
up. Yeah, yeah, you happen to just come down right when somebody else is bouncing. It like you squeal with delight. It's so
Oh,
wondrous.
it's
And I
so
think about
great.
it like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it just amplifies the whole, right? And I would imagine now in the workplace, I mean, I have been out of, let's say, the corporate workplace for quite some time as an entrepreneur, but um, so many roles are blending and now everybody's kind of in this mix together. And so when you're working with teams, what does it mean for you now in the workplace in your specific industry for people to go from survival, I know you mentioned that, to thrive, from survive to thrive, or burnout to what would you call it, like empowerment or
Joy.
joy? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just as a side note, I
Yeah.
have decided that we can say survival to thrival. I'm just going to make that
Okay, okay, good. Because I was like, that didn't quite work. So I had to change
just
it.
making that a word. We're going to claim
Survive
it.
to thrive, survival to thrival. I like it. I like it.
You know, so I mean, there's a very clear reality of the importance. And I don't just think it's in, well, I know it's not just in teams where, you know, with our fire, police, or healthcare, or any of those. I used to think that. I used to think if you maybe it had to do with healthcare, because that's where it started for me. And then I thought, well, maybe it's helping professions. And what I've realized is if you woke up human today, that this is where we are. And so it doesn't even matter if it's corporate, if it's entrepreneurs. I mean, as an entrepreneur, my husband and I are both entrepreneurs. That can be its own. Really, I mean, we're doing all of the things. We are the team every
Yeah.
single day. So, you know, the reality though comes down to, in particular, when you think about burnout, um, the difference can be and has been, and I've seen it with my own eyes, moving people from hopelessness. Hopelessness is very dangerous, scary place to be, because hopelessness is is the place, and you know, and this is just speaking some truth into something really hard, um, where suicidal ideation comes up.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And, you know, for me, in my experience, I worked for years as an emergency nurse, and I lost three of my colleagues during that time
Mm.
to suicide related to burnout. And
Yeah.
when I work with these teams, I hear the same things. And in fact, what I find so um, powerful is we can do just a couple of things, just a couple of tools,
Mhm.
and they start to have some awareness around, where am I?
Mm.
And I can't tell you, it's countless amounts of time now people have said, that saved my life. You don't even understand
Mm.
how badly I needed this today. It saved my life. And, you know, and we're talking some of our um, just toughest folks doing the most, you know, like jobs that we would think, man, they're just steel, you know, but
Right.
the reality is, no, we're human. We're human
Yeah.
inside, and we need permission to be human. Uh,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, I've really seen truly when it goes to from survival, I'm talking about survival
Yeah.
of our lives, to thriving. And that's not an understatement, because I've seen it over and over.
Wow. And so the collective narrative, I mean, I would imagine, I mean, I've seen things on this, like the US is pretty much top of the list of burnout and stress and people dying of stress. And I think China and Japan were some of the top countries as well, where people just work like so much. And how do we change that collective narrative? I mean, I know that it's starting to change. Thank God. Like 20 years ago, people didn't even do yoga.
Mhm.
It was like hard for me to even get people to do it. Now they're like, I want to do yoga. Everybody
Yeah.
wants to do yoga. So it's changing.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are some of the tools, I guess, that you mentioned that maybe we can tell our audience about?
Well, so I think in that realm, so we're moved kind of into this place of, talking about burnout. I think what's important is, this is a place where courage is needed. Courage shows up where we need, where change shows up, where harm shows up, and where shame shows up. And then all kinds of, mixtures of those things. So discomfort. Um,
Yeah.
and when we think about what's needed, what are some of those tools, I think one of them is one of the first things, and it sounds trivial, but it is anything but. And in fact, it's been found in the research to be one of the fastest ways to help you short term. It's not a long-term solution, but it's needed in the short term quickly, is self-compassion. So how
Mm.
do you talk to yourself? So is your inner critic in there running wild? In which, I like to think about our inner critic too as our amygdala. So, kind of our fear system, or our, not just fear system, but really our survival system.
Mhm.
But we talk about her affectionately in our house as Amy G. Dalla. And she's the bouncer of Club Brain, and all the cool things happen in Club Brain, but you got to get past her. But if she's like completely freaking out, thinking the club is not safe, she's not letting you in, and she might wreak a little havoc on who gets to go in and who doesn't. So, what are you saying to yourself when you make small mistakes? I mean, I think just if we can even pause to listen to how do we talk to ourselves and think about it. We think about, if I spilled my coffee this morning, I'm like, oh my gosh, Lucy, you're such an idiot. I can't believe you did that. Right?
Mhm.
If I thought about, if I had a friend who spoke to me that way, we wouldn't be friends.
Right.
I wouldn't tolerate that. I would
Right.
have a very clear boundary that that wasn't okay. And so, there's so much power in making yourself your own best friend.
I love that so much. I'm trying to actually teach my son this right now. He's so hard on himself when he makes mistakes. He just came out competitive as all competitive.
Mm.
And I said, "Oh, that probably came through our genes because we're all competitive." That's something I've been working on as well. But it's like, yeah, he will definitely go down that path of really berating himself for tiny mistakes. And I'm always trying to encourage him to be, I use the lion. I use the lion and courage actually, which
Oh,
is
yeah.
great because we were talking about courage. I say, if you're the lion, you can roar. But you can also, protect yourself. You can also know that you're powerful. You can also know that you can change it. You can also know, I try to use this imagery, and
Mhm.
I'm curious, what do you think about that? Like if somebody's really struggling with an inner critic, which I know we do. Um, yeah, I loved the Amy, what did you say, call her Amy?
Amy G. Dalla. So it spells
Amy G. Dalla.
amygdala.
So I would imagine breath. I mean, breath is a tool that I use to get
Yes.
out of the amygdala
Yeah.
and to relax. What are some other entry points, or how do we get around that inner critic?
So I think there's certainly multiple different ways that we can do that. I think, some of them is understanding. I mean, I think first and foremost, understand that your inner critic is not your enemy. It's a protective
Mhm.
mechanism. It's there from past experiences, and it wants to keep you safe. And so I think that's a really important thing, is just, what I teach my kiddos is we give her a name, we give her a hug, and we invite her to relax and breathe with us. And I think
Mhm.
when we can do that, it kind of helps us to know that this is a piece. It's not all, it's not
Uh-huh.
our whole. And then I think, other things is you can challenge the accuracy of our critic statements, because a lot of times they'll be really harsh and they're absolutely irrational.
Right.
So,
Is this true?
challenge the accuracy. Reframing, I think reframing is so important. It doesn't mean that we don't need our own feedback, that we
Uh-huh.
don't need our own pause and to see what there is to learn in situations like that. Absolutely there is. Which is not helpful for us to do that in a way where we're sabotaging our own success.
Mhm.
Um, because we learn when we feel safe and held. So if
Mhm.
we're going to learn from our mistakes, then we have to help ourselves feel safe and held. And then I think, all of that really kind of comes down into moving from that fixed mindset into that growth mindset. So if you're saying this is too hard, I'm just going to give up. I always quit anyway. So what does it really matter? Then you can say things like, I'm going to persevere. This is hard. I know I can put one foot in front of the other. I can rest if I need to, but I'm just going to keep going. I've
Mm.
got this person, this person, and this person I can call on to help me.
I
And we
love,
reframe.
yeah.
You know. And one other thing I think is really, really important, that steps a little bit outside of this, but I just feel like I would not do it justice to share about burnout and not say that, truly, if we're going to solve around that as a country,
Mhm.
um, that solving comes by addressing the systems issues.
Mhm.
Burnout is an occupational issue, whether that occupation you live in your house or whether that is, something that you're going to a place. It is 70% roughly driven by organizational systems issues. You
Mhm.
really have to do the work on those drivers. So there's 6 main drivers, and that's a whole different thing. But
I
I
was gonna
just
say that's
wanted to
probably, I would
acknowledge.
love to hear it at some point. I'm sure that there's amazing information there. Maybe we'll do another podcast, you and I. Um, but I'm also just like so curious about ways that people can start to just like a simple, maybe there's something simple you could share with us about how to layer back, if we're in burnout and we're so consistently in burnout and everybody's in the frame of mind that we should be working all of these hours and whatnot. What are some simple things that people can start to do? Because I know a lot of this probably has to do with boundaries. At least that's what I
Mhm.
teach with women, is they're not accustomed to, or we aren't as a culture accustomed to personal boundaries. And a lot of women are people pleasers as well. And so they're like, I'll just do whatever I need to, or I need to make people happy. Do you
Mhm.
teach that kind of stuff in the organizations or with the people, the teams that you work with?
So I do, and I will tell you, like, so I always say, like, I'm a courage cartographer because I make maps of courage. I help people design their maps.
I
Um,
love
and the fact that I am a map maker does not mean that I don't need my own map. So this is one
that.
of those places for me where I constantly have to go back to the map I've created for myself to look at how to hold that space that is in the highest standard and respect for myself and the other, any other human or being that I'm coming into contact with. Because I think that's one of the things about boundaries that's really important for us to acknowledge is it's not just me saying, no, no,
Right.
not right. That's,
Right.
it's about me understanding what having the clearest vision of my purpose and really having this clarity of what my purpose and my values are. And when I'm very clear about those things and clear about what and who gets my yes,
Mhm.
then it becomes much easier. Then it's not so much a no to all the other things, although no is required.
Yeah.
So I think, just a quick tip on that, standing in power pose. So, one foot in front of the other, hands on hips, really straight spine, head going up to the ceiling and putting your chest out and practicing in the mirror saying, no, I can't take that on right now. It's not in alignment
Mm.
with with the direction I'm going. That's it. Or whatever your statement that you feel really comfortable. I think that's important too, feeling really, really comfortable with whatever it is that you say, but practice it in the mirror. Because
Mm.
if you feel like it's hard to say it to yourself, it's going to be harder when it comes down to, needing to say it in public. And
Yeah.
especially in those places where you feel like, oh, am I going to miss an opportunity? So let me give you an example
Yeah.
really quickly. Um, I was, I've had the opportunity to lead this task force for a very large healthcare system in the US. And that has garnered some attention in different areas. And so the White House called one day and said, hey, can you help us with an interview? But I was going to Orlando, Florida with my children on vacation, and they didn't really have a specific time. It was kind of like, we need you to kind of be on hold, on pause, and
Mm.
we'll call you, and then you'll have about 10-minute turnaround time. And I thought, but I might be at Universal Studios going on a ride that day. And so, I mean, I had a couple of options, and I feel like those are things where we as women can often feel like, if I say no to that opportunity, I'm never ever going to have that again. It's just going to walk out the door. But I had to think about my list, and I went down my list. I got really clear on my purpose. I just went back to my map, my purpose, my values, my people, what it is I'm on this planet to do. And the no was easy. And
I
I
love it.
didn't regret it one single bit. But I had every ounce of fun I could have with my two little girls.
Oh, I absolutely love that story. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's so good. And it's so important to remember core values, what our priorities are. We only get, right, our set, like we only have this body also. So if we're not taking care of it, how are we serving our families and our kids and
Yeah.
everybody else?
And then I think there's the ripple effect. That's the other thing about courage that's really interesting. It is highly contagious, highly contagious, which is beautiful. So if you have a clear practice of how you do that, don't keep it to yourself. I
Uh-huh.
I share that. Here's how I did that. And my girls saw it. Think of, what a gift that will be for them. Um, every time that every single woman ever demonstrates courage, everyone around you just got a gift, a huge gift, because we know on the other side is freedom, empowerment, relief, inner
Mm.
strength of self. And you gave that gift.
Mm, that is so powerful. That thank you for sharing that. I'm feeling like that's kind of like a good place to almost wrap up and just like tie a beautiful bow around all the things that you're saying. I mean, there's so much wisdom in everything that you shared today. If you had any last comments for the ladies who are watching this or anything else you'd like to say, um, let us know how we can find you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I'm on Instagram on Courage Cartographer. Find me on my website, lucyhoughton.com. Maybe we can drop some fun gifts that things that we've talked about in
Yeah.
here, like an inner critic um, and some of the other tools, and we can drop them, and folks can just start diving in for themselves. But I would say, if you're just like, I don't know where to start, but I know that I want to have more courage in my life, then I would say get really, really clear on your values. That's one of the most pivotal places that helps us in the dark spots when we don't feel like there's anybody there that can come and help us. There always are people, but sometimes we don't feel like it. But our values, they are a beacon of light for
Oh,
us.
so, so powerful. That is such a great reminder. Thank you so much
Oh,
for
thank
coming on
you.
here with your bright walls and your beautiful art and your exquisite smile and obvious courage in your own life and for sharing all the things that you do with women to get them to that other side and of freedom and empowerment. It's exactly why we're all here, turning our struggles into these successes and these courageous women that are out there like you who just keep rippling and rippling that good energy out. So I'm honored and so grateful that you were here. And to those of us who are listening, please find Lucy. All of her information will be in the show notes. All the freebies that she says she has for you on the inner critic, etc. Those will all be there too. So check out all of her links. And if you like this podcast, The Empowered Woman, please click subscribe and join our movement to unleash all these unstoppable spirits into the world. It's www.youtube.com at Nicole Ananda. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
So much. What a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.